So Zera Shimshon for Parshas Behar on page Kufchav Gimel, in the middle of the page, on the right side, V'od yesh pratim acherim. What he's here is he's trying to answer the famous question of Rashi. Rashi asks why the parsha begins with, instead of Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor, which the Torah usually begins with, it says Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe Behar Sinai lemor. It adds those words Behar Sinai. And Rashi asks the question, Ma inyan Shmita etzel Har Sinai? What is the connection between Shmita and Har Sinai? In other words, why is Har Sinai mentioned? And Rashi only answers half the question. Rashi tells us to teach us that just like by Shemitah, as we see in the parsha, the Torah gives us the general ideas, but also gives us all the specifics. The Torah gives us very intricate and specific details. So too, when it comes to the rest of the Torah, we're supposed to derive that just like by Shemitah, from Har Sinai we were given both the general and the specifics, so too at Har Sinai we were given both the general and the specifics. Which means that, for example, when the Torah gives us the mitzvah of tefillin, the Torah gives us one line. It just says, that's all the Torah tells us. The Torah tells us it 4 times, but it doesn't give any specifics. When the Torah tells us how to build a sukkah, it just says, Basukkah's Teishru Shivas Yamim, doesn't tell us what the sukkah should be made of and what the qualifications of a sukkah. So some people are under the false impression that the Torah just said make a sukkah and then the rabbis made up the rest. And so that's why the Torah says no, Behar Sinai, and the Torah gives us all these details to tell you that all these details trace back to Har Sinai. And that's Rashi's answer, which is a very important, most basic principle within the Torah. But it doesn't answer the question for why did the Torah specifically choose Shemitah to make it this example. The Torah could have done this with any mitzvah, given generalizations and a lot of specifics with any mitzvah, and used the word Behar Sinai with any mitzvah, and we would know this rule. Why was Shemitah chosen? So there must be some, and that's where all the commentaries come in, to try to explain the connection between the mitzvah of Shemitah and Har Sinai. And the Zera Shimshon has a long Torah on this. We're going to pick up in the middle from page Kufchav Gimel. V'od yesh pratim acherim b'Shmitah domim lahar Sinai. There's further connections between Shemitah and Har Sinai. And he explains like this. Shem yishmeru hashmitah. If the Jewish people would keep the laws of Shemitah, lo yihiyu golim me'artzam, there would be no exile. The reason why we were in exile in Babylon for 70 years in Babel, neged shivim shmitos shabatlu, to correspond with the 70 years of Shemitah that we missed. Which means the Jewish people were in Eretz Yisrael from when they first arrived with Yehoshua for about 900 years. It was 900 plus, but let's call it 900 years, the Jewish people. Of those, less than half the time they kept Shemitah. The majority of the time. And what we're told is, by the time they went into exile, there was a total of about 490 years worth of years that they did not keep Shemitah, which would leave for about 70 Shemitas. And that's why they went into exile for those 70 years where the land was left fallow, and that would make up for the missed Shemitah years. And that's actually what it says in Parshas Bechukotai, that you'll go into exile. And Rashi there, on that pasuk, makes the calculation that that's the 70 years of exile.
Two questions. We get multiple reasons why we went into exile. We are told, for instance, by the Zera Shimshon, we went into exile because of Avodah Zarah. So are these things mutually exclusive? Are they?
That's a really good question. It seems from the commentaries, we went into exile for the first time because of the 3 cardinal sins: idolatry, adultery, and murder. The duration of 70 years was corresponding to the Shemitahs.
And what does it mean to say that we didn't keep? Does that mean that one Jew didn't keep? Does that mean that the Rove didn't keep?
That's a really good question. I don't know if we have an answer to that. I would guess that based on the laws that we know, that the community is always punished after the rov. So I would guess that it would be a majority of the people who are not keeping Shemitah. That would be my best guess, but I haven't seen that. Okay, now, ukeshekarvu lahar Sinai, we know that when the Jews approached Har Sinai, kanu acherus, that's when they earned their true freedom. K'dechsiv, as it says, charus al haluchos, the Torah uses the word charus with the luchos, cherus mishibed malchius, which was freedom from the exile, subjugation to the kingdoms. Which means, and we know this, when we talk about the 4 cups, we say, v'otzeisi v'yitzalti v'ga'alti v'lakachti. According to most of the Rishonim, v'hotzeisi is when we stopped working, v'yitzalti is when we left Egypt, v'ga'alti is when we crossed the sea, and v'lakachti is when we stood at Har Sinai. V'lakachti eschem li la'am, I will take you to be a people for me. Which means when we talk about the 4 languages of redemption, the completion of the redemption occurred 50 days after. By Shavuos, when we're going to say on Shavuos, by the Kiddush, Zecher Yetzias Mitzrayim, it really is a Zecher Yetzias Mitzrayim. It's really a commemoration, because by Har Sinai we were truly free. Not just free from Egypt, but the way it was supposed to be, was that Har Sinai, we were never going to be in exile again. Because even though we'd already gone officially free, from the first day of Pesach when we left Egypt, in Kol Zeh, we weren't truly free. Because even though we were physically free of Egypt, we weren't spiritually free of Egypt. The Jewish people as a whole had to count 7 clean days, which is what the Zohar says, that the 7 weeks of Sphira are corresponding to the 7 clean days that a Zav, Zava, or Nida would have to count to become purified. The Zohar tells us that that's the reason for the 7 weeks of Sfiras HaOmer. The halacha is that with a Zav, a Zava, and a Nida, again, that's for both men and women. The man when he's a zav, and the woman when she's a zava or nida. There's actually, according to some, not everyone agrees with this, but some would say that there's a mitzvah that the woman should actually count out loud. Today is day 1, today is day 2. And the same thing with the zav. So even if that's not that's not what's done, but certainly by Sfiras HaOmer, we count today is day 1. Of course, we're assuming that we're somehow clean. The Alshich explains like this. So the day 50 is the day when we go to the mikvah, spiritually speaking. That's when we became completely free. So the Shavuos is the celebration of the true freedom, spiritually speaking. So, of course, everyone can see where he's going with this. So Shemitah, which is also 7 times 7, is connected to Har Sinai in such a deep way based on this. That's why the Torah chose of all the mitzvahs to mention Har Sinai, Shemitah and Yovel, Shem Chamishim Shana, which is 50 years, Neged Osam HaChamishim Yom, corresponding directly to the 50 days of Sfiras HaOmer. Whilst Kanu Acheres Olam, they received eternal freedom. Acheres Elyon, the supernal freedom. Vanituru Mizal Masam, they were cleansed of their impurity. So this is so beautiful. He's saying that on the lowest level, you have a purity that comes from 1 week. That's true by Zav, Zava, Nida. The truth is that even somebody who's come into contact with a dead body needs 7 days of purification. And the Torah needs 7 days of purification. A woman who had a boy needs 7 days of purification. That's the level. That's the micro. Right. That's the base level. When you have an entire people who need purification from the spiritual impurity of Egypt, that's what we're in Sfiras HaOmer, that's 7 times 7, reaching 7 times 7 days, meaning 7 weeks, where we are reaching the spiritual purity as a people to be freed of the deeper spiritual impurity of Egypt. And then you have the highest level, which is the Jewish people, in their whole lifetime who have the 50 years of 7 years cycles in order to achieve so those three, the 7 days, 7 weeks, and 7 years are each higher level, one above the other, to achieve spiritual perfection. He says, Yisrael Shamdu al Har Sinai, Paska Zu Hamasan. When the Jewish people stood at Har Sinai, all their poison, the spiritual impurity within them, went away. Because the main spiritual poison comes from the first sin of Adam and Chava, because it caused divisiveness and separation. This is so beautiful the way he says this. And when we came to Har Sinai, the most important thing that happened at Har Sinai was Vayichan Sham Yisrael. The Jewish people camped there. And it should have said Vayachanu Sham Yisrael, which is the plural. They camped there. Instead it says Vayichan, which is singular term. Amr Zala, sages derived from that. That it was Belev Achad Ki Ish Achad. It was with one heart, like one person. Yichud Gadol Va'atzum. This was an incredible unification. Mishishim Riba of 600,000 people. Shahayu Shamu were there. Umikala Neshama Sa'asidas Lavo, and I've never seen anyone say this, but he says this, that it was also all the future souls. Now everyone knows all the future souls were there. But he's saying all the future souls also felt that unity. All of us were there, united with each other, with every other Jew that exists in the world today and that has ever existed. We were all Belev Achad Ki Ish Achad. L'chein b'mitzvahs hayovel. That's why Yovel, which corresponds to that, Yovel corresponds to the 50 years when we achieved this level. Ksiv deror ba'aretz l'chol yeshva, a freedom in the land to all its inhabitants. And a very interesting halacha when it comes to Yovel. It's the exception to the rules of the Torah, and it causes a whole bunch of other exceptions. Do we keep Yovel today? We don't. And because we don't keep Yovel today, there's all kinds of things that we don't keep. There's certain things that are only the disagreement about Shemitah and all these other things, whether they apply when Yovel doesn't apply. Why doesn't Yovel apply today? Because the halacha is that Yovel requires all the Jewish people living in Eretz Yisrael. Now there's a question whether you need a majority, but it seems that once you have a majority of Jewish people living in Eretz Yisrael, we might, according to some opinions, be obligated to keep Yovel. And when we keep Yovel, that would... Not everyone agrees it's a majority, but it seems that if we're getting there, but we don't have a majority yet, it's getting close. Unfortunately, we're getting a majority in Eretz Yisrael for the wrong reason, because Jews in America are disappearing. That's not a good reason to get a majority in Eretz Yisrael, but it is approaching, and the rabbis are dealing with the question for that moment. That as soon as we hit the majority, we're going to have some major halachic issues.
What are the others?
Well, there's all kinds of mitzvahs that only apply when Yovel applies. There's a whole list of them. But
would we know when Yovel is actually?
Well, that would be part of the debate. Would it start from when we start counting, or do we go back to ancient days? And
5777, according to a Turkish Kabbalistic person.
Well, yeah, there's a debate halachically as to how Yovel works then. Yes.
So you talk about exiles. So when you're exiled, there's of course no Yovel, right?
Right.
So the first exile would have been the Egyptian exile, right?
Right, but Yovel doesn't start till the Jews first enter Eretz Yisrael.
So then, now you haven't. Then we took the land, and then we had the Babylonian exile. Now that only lasted 70 years, right?
Right.
When they came back and they started, there was no event, right? I mean, it wasn't as if they were how should I put this? Certainly the Mashiach didn't come.
Right.
And they just took up.
Right. It was supposed to be, when they came back, it was supposed to be a big show, but we failed.
But
Right.
they just took up where they left off.
Right.
Okay, now, we've been out of Eretz Yisrael for...
Close to 2,000 years.
It's hard to count, but... exactly.
1,900 plus years. Yeah.
Okay, 1,900 plus years. But I think we have this concept that we really can't start doing the things related to our return until the Mashiach comes, right?
Well, technically, when it comes to some things, so for example, establishing a king, rebuilding the Beis Hamikdash, and things like that, there are those opinions who say that we will refuse to do it until Mashiach comes. But Yovel is a technical thing. Once you have the majority,
No, but they did. After the end of Babylonian exile, they did do these things.
right? Well, they had what?
Didn't they resume Shemitah once they returned?
Right. Well, they did. The question is, did they resume Yovel? It seems they did. Let's assume that they resumed Yovel as well. This is all a big debate in the Gemara. The Gemara goes back and forth. When the Jewish people did come back after the first exile in Bavel, did they have a majority? Was it the majority of the people? What about the other 10 tribes? And all this is all a discussion in the Gemara, a very complicated one. So the same issues would apply today.
To rebuild the Beis Hamikdash. So once you had the Beis Hamikdash, I would assume you had Yovel, no?
No. That's what I'm saying. Yovel depends on the majority of people in the land. That's it. Right there. Yeah.
What does the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash? What is the conditions for rebuilding the Beis Hamikdash?
That's another big debate. There's a Chuvas of the Chassam Sofer about this. Would we require first that we become purified with the red cow? Do we need a Navi, which is what many say? I think the Rambam seems to suggest that we would need a Navi to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash simply because we don't know what we're doing. So we would need God's help building Beis Hamikdash until we have Mashiach. We wouldn't dare to try to do this in case we get it wrong.
Smicha? When would we reestablish Smicha?
So Eliyahu Hanavi can bring back Smicha because he has Smicha and he never died.
Even today.
So we need Eliyahu.
This organization.
Wow.
In 1967, there were people who were donating money to build the Beis Hamikdash. I remember.
I think you have the Temple Institute today who are trying to, but they're not backed by any major rabbanim. So, and you see this from the fact that they decided they're going to build a menorah, and they couldn't do it according to halachic specifications, so they built their own version of the menorah. Okay, so that means we're not going to use it, right? So that menorah that you see, the famous menorah that they've built and put in the glass case, it's not kosher. Right? So,
Why?
it's not pure gold. It's just layered in gold. And,
Oh.
yeah. I mean, you can't really build a menorah because anything made out of pure gold, without a miracle, the staves can't hold themselves up because the weight. Yeah. Okay. Back to where he's going. So he says the Yovel only applies when all the Jewish people are in Eretz Yisrael. Let's call it all, whether the definition of all means the majority, but the technical term is when all the Jewish people are in the land. Why? Because we need to go back to Ish Echad B'Lev Echad in order to achieve the true freedom. So that's why when we are dispersed in exile, we can't connect to Yovel in the same way we can't connect to each other in the right way, which is why we can't connect to true freedom in the right way. We can't keep Yovel, which is 50, because we can't correspond well to the 50th day, which is the Jewish people were united. But the lowest level, which is the 7 days, no haggis, that applies. That applies even if you don't have a majority on the land. Shemitah. Because the poison didn't come back, that goes away. You can have the 7-day purity without all the unity. But the Shemitah is a preparation. It's all working on those 7s. The Mehera Yibana Beis Hamikdash, because may it be soon that the Beis Hamikdash will be rebuilt. V'yiskabtzu agalios, and the exiles will be gathered in. V'yicholim lekadesh hayovel, and we'll be able to keep Yovel. Ki lishuascha kivinu kol hayom, because every day we await your salvation. So again, let me repeat this, because He seems to be making a lot of different points, but there's one basic idea here. The reason why the Torah chooses to connect Har Sinai to Shemitah is to tell you that what we are working on with our Shemitah is to try to achieve some level of connection, to work our way up to the 50, which is the complete freedom, which is what we did when we were approaching Har Sinai, when we spent the 7 days times 7 weeks, trying to achieve that true freedom. Shemitah and Yovel is a bigger version. It's a grander version of what we're doing during these 50 days. And he says, because Har Sinai was meant to achieve the level of Vayichan Sham Yisrael, the level of unity, which is what allows the Jewish people to be fixed, so therefore Yovel accomplishes that on a greater level, but it requires all the Jewish people together to be able to do that. He says, with this you can explain the verse. This is a verse in Parshas Bechukotai. The land will abandon them, will be abandoned by them. Basically referring to the world, the earth, Eretz Yisrael, will then have its Shabboses. It will have its rest. And again the verse says, then the earth will receive all its days of rest from all the days of its desolation. As Tishbas Haaretz, where it says, as Shabboseh, Kol Yimei Hashem Tisbesh, as Shabbos Shabbosech, Shabbat Chamalah, the verse says it over and over again, that the earth will have its time of rest. V'kasha. So he says, I have a question. Yigalu Yisrael me'arza. If the Jewish people are going to leave Eretz Yisrael, Tia Aretz Masura beyada oivim, won't the enemies take over? V'em yavdu akarka b'shmita neb'yovlos. They'll work it day and night. They'll work it on Shemitah and on Yovel. So why is Hashem saying that the land's going to have a break, Shabbos, and have a rest? Then the earth will rest. He says, basically, it's a great question. Hashem says, I'm going to give the land to your enemies, and they're going to sit there in your place, and then the earth will have its rest. No, it won't. They'll work it all the time. Everyone knows the answer to this question. But look at the perspective that he's saying. The Torah told you this 3,500 years ago. That the Torah says when you're out of the land, nothing's going to grow. Right? It says that in the Torah. Shishim ribu ayaras hoylo liyani amelach Behar amelach. The Gemara in Gittin tells us that Yanai the king had 600,000 towns or cities in Har HaMelech. Each one of those 600,000 towns had as many as those who left Egypt, which would mean 600,000 families and 2 million people. Chutz mishlosha, except there were 3 larger towns. Shayibam kiflam kiyotze Mitzrayim. That's what the Gemara says. Amar le'ahu mina le'Rab Chanina. So there was this heretic who heard Rabbi Chanina say this, and he says, Shakri mashkarisu, you're a bunch of liars. I've been to Eretz Yisrael. I've been to Har HaMelech. And Amar Ula himself said, I went to look at this place. That space couldn't hold 600,000 reeds.
Not cities, not towns.
Cities, yeah, you want cities, large cities. That space couldn't hold. Pirish Rashi, he says, Mashakrisu. The heretic called us a liar. You say, Shishim Riba Ayaras or Bahar HaMelech. You are in the Masay of Shishim Riba Kanim. How could you say that there were 600,000 cities in a place? I've been there now. It's an empty field. What are you claiming? There was 500,000 cities in this place? Amar lei. So the Rabbi Chanina answered to the heretic, Ksiv ba Eretz Tzvi. Eretz Yisrael is called Eretz Tzvi, the land of the deer. According to most, Tzvi is a deer. Why? Ma tzviza in ora machzigas besaro. Because if you skin a deer, you can never wrap that skin around the carcass of that deer again. It will shrink. and it will never be as big. Even if you get machines to stretch it out, it'll just stretch. It'll thin out. So how does that make sense? But HaKadosh Baruch Hu made an animal that we should see that that's the way that the land works. In oro machzik es besaro, their skin is just not enough to cover their body, their flesh. Af Eretz Yisrael, the land of Eretz Yisrael, bizman sheyoshvim aleh, when the Jewish people are dwelling on it, ravcha, there's more space. In Yoshvim aleh, when the Jews leave Gamda, it shrunk. Ad kam b'Gemara. That's what the Gemara says. That we have not. You think you've done a tour of Eretz Yisrael? You've done nothing. You are seeing a shrunken version of Eretz Yisrael. The Imkain. This is unbelievable. Kishe'ein Yisrael ba'aretz nikashvisa la'aretz. The land is at rest. She'arei lo nishar mimena ela chelik ma'at mize'er. Because we are barely getting a portion of Eretz Yisrael. V'ashar na'lemes v'niskases. Eretz Yisrael, the rest of it is hidden away from us. Which means then, according to the Zera Shimshon, when Mashiach comes, or even before that, if, according to some, if the Jewish people would pick themselves up, and on Kamfei Nisharim, the majority, and go to Eretz Yisrael, we would have to rewrite the map. That's what he's saying. Eretz Yisrael would be a different size. It only looks like it's this size. So when we talk about right now, you could travel from the eastern border to the western border in 45 minutes, from the Jordan to the Mediterranean. When the majority of the Jewish people will be there, you might need 40 hours to get across the country.
So are you implying not just by, war or kicking out Palestinians, you're applying...
That's exactly what I'm saying he says. Because the land itself shrunk, and we find, furthermore he says, V'zui hashvisa gemura sheyesh la, and this is, therefore, the land is at rest. The land is at rest because we don't even have access to the vast majority of Eretz Yisrael. And furthermore,
The Zera Shimshon should be hidden away from these negotiations. Trying to figure out.
right, maybe. Besides that, even what's left, even the land that we do have, it simply does not give fruit. While the Jewish people were there. Which means, first of all, most of Eretz Yisrael is hidden away. And even what we have, it's just not going to grow while the Gaon were there. And that means this is another place where the Torah makes, according to Zera Shimshon, makes a bold prediction, and that we, 2,000 years later, know that it's true. We have Mark Twain traveling through Eretz Yisrael, and he writes, he says, what are these people fighting over? Thousands of years, everyone's fighting over this dust bowl. There's nothing growing here. They're trying. There's nothing growing. Nothing grew for thousands of years. And then the Jewish people came back, and just like that, it's growing. And the Zera Shimshon is saying, it's not even growing. When we talk about what the land was like when the Jewish people were there, when there will be a majority. And so Hashem is saying that in his Torah. Hashem says, when you are thrown out of the land will rest. Nothing will grow. He continues. But he goes into a more positive approach. There's another point which makes Shemitah connected to Har Sinai. We know the 7th year brought blessing to the 6th year. It would actually grow on the 6th year. It would grow too much. I spoke to someone who told me that actually they're having trouble in Eretz Yisrael because during the 6th year, all the people who are keeping Shemitah, their fields grow so well today. They grow so well in the 6th year that it's causing too much supply and lowering the prices over the 6th year because they're not hiding it away. They're just making it available. That's lowering the prices and hurting the economy. Because all the people who are keeping Shemitah, their stuff grows better during the 6th year and they have more. And this is a problem that they're facing as more and more Jews, we should always have such problems, as more and more Jews are keeping Shemitah, and it's a growing trend. It's not growing fast enough. But there are a lot of, if you go back to the 1930s when Rav Kook went around trying to convince farmers, at that point they thought he was everyone thought that he was out of his mind to think that he could convince these, and that the majority of people didn't
Why
keep
don't
the
they have
laws of
to
Shemitah.
store it away if they're keeping Shemitah?
Well, they do, but there's just so much supply available that the prices it's hard to maintain the price. I guess the rules for how they're regulated are not quite as...
The farmers normally do not hold on to the excess stuff.
Right.
The wholesalers, they have the facilities like refrigerator and the special places to hold on to it, so they may get the profit, not the farmer.
Right. So they have to deal with this issue, and we should deal. Eretz Yisrael should always deal with the problem of having excess. Although it is a problem sometimes, you have to deal with it. But he's saying that there's a special bracha that comes because Hashem provides in the 6th year. I'm just saying we can taste it. V'chein yeh la'asid lavo, so it will be in the future. Because in Peri Gimel d'Ksubas, Loko olam hazeh olam haba. Then in the future, olam hazeh yishbatzar lidruch v'livtzo. While we are in this world, we have to deal with threshing and harvesting the grapes. But in the it'll just be big giant grapes. And in fact, the beginning of creation was supposed to be this way. Lule chet Adam, were it not for Adam's sin, Adam la'amal yulad, that man was created to toil. That the way it was supposed to be was that all this work would get done on its own. When we say get done on its own, it would mean that there would be people in the world who would be serving all the Jewish people, and they would be taking care of our needs, and we will be like the priests, the whole people. Atem tiuli mamleches kohanim, you will be for me a kingdom of kohanim. The kohanim weren't supposed to do work, they weren't supposed to have regular jobs, they were in the service of Hashem, and the people took care of them, but it wasn't charity, they performed a service. This was a service and they were taken care of. So the Gemara says, Chasidim Arishonim, Shaisuterasim Nasam, the earlier pious ones, who the Torah was their job, Umalacha Nasis Me'alaha, their work was done on their own. Lulechat Adam Rishon, but we know Adam Rishon sinned, and I talked about this on Wednesday night at length, if you get a chance to listen to the recording. Shenema, as it says, V'zeh asapecha tochal lechem, by the sweat of your brow you shall eat bread, which means he was punished that the bread no longer came on its own. We have to do all this work. But the Gemara tells us in brachas, if we go back to doing what we're supposed to do, then Hashem will find people to work for us. The strangers will come and they will shepherd your sheep. Which means when the time comes, when Mashiach will come, there will be pilgrims from all over the world who will be coming on mission to come and work for the Jews for the chance to have some spiritual definition in their lives. And they will work our fields and care for our vineyards so that we can all sit and listen to shiurim from the Zera Shimshon himself.
I just, in 2010, we were in Israel and we went to Har HaBracha, and there is an Orthodox-run vineyard up there. It only produces wine for use in Israel. It doesn't export. And the head of the vineyard has a picture of people working in the fields for his, locally distributed wine, and none of the people who are working in the field are Jewish. They're from Tennessee and Georgia, and I asked him if was this a one-time thing. He says no, they come every year because they think it is their duty to help the Jewish people harvest grapes.
Wow. Okay, so it could be that they might have some ulterior motive. And by that
I asked him
I
about
mean
that,
for their
he said he
for
didn't
their
think so,
spiritual religion.
Uh-huh.
But the idea is still the meaning,
Right,
because
right.
they feel that in order to help bring about their salvation. But the idea is already there, that they're already picking up that that's really their role. That's their job. People are supposed to come. We're going to skip a paragraph. When we stood at Har Sinai with one heart, like one person, at that point, that's the way it was going to be. We were going to go to Eretz Yisrael with the Torah, and we were going to study the Torah and serve Hashem basically all day long, and the nations of the world were going to come and do our work for us. The Torah was given for people who don't need to work, because the month falls for them. And by we know with the laws of Shemitah that even what grows on its own, everything becomes hefker. On the next page, let's see if we can fit this in. The Yalkut tells us, Lama nitna Torah b'midbar. Why was the Torah given in the midbar? Loma sha'Torah hu mufkeres lakol, that the Torah is free for everyone to take. Torah kasva lanu Behar Sinai, b'mitzvos hashmita k'dei shenilmad shekol ma shetziva Behar Sinai yudugman the Shemitah. Whatever was given on Har Sinai is like Shemitah. Geshem sheshvi is hefker lakol, yikachatori hefker lakol. So he's saying again this amazing idea. Har Sinai is Yovel. The 7 days were a Shemitah, and just like by Shemitah, there's all this blessing that comes during the 6th year. Representing, meaning that allowing us, the Shemitah year, to focus on our service of Hashem and all our needs taken care of. And that's the way it's supposed to be when the Jewish people arrive at Har Sinai. That was for them going to be the opportunity to sit in the service of Hashem while the man falls from heaven and the nations of the world are providing for all their needs. So, Maybe we'll just close this off here. So he's saying that when it comes to Shemitah, the way that our needs are provided for Shemitah is that it's available for everyone to take. The Torah also works like that. The Torah is available for everyone to take. And if we're talking about the Jewish people needing to be Osem Ritzon Shal Makom, we have to be fulfilling the will of God in order to merit this level, where the world is providing for us, where the earth itself is providing for us, that level can be achieved when each of us approaches the Torah in this way. So just as a motivation, he talks about this more, but we're going to end here. As a motivation, before we're coming to Shavuos, Mitzvah Shem, next week we'll have an official pre-Shavuos Zera Shimshon class, but where we're approaching Shavuos, we have to realize that the Torah is available for all of us. In order for us to receive the Torah, we have to go into the field and we have to collect those fruits, and we have to make ourselves available to receive the bracha which comes. May we be zercha to a true Kabbalah Torah through a purification of the 7 times 7, achieve 50 days to the point where all of Klal Yisrael will come to Eretz Yisrael and live in Yovel, in the Eretz Yisrael, which is going to be many times greater, as the Zera Shimshon describes, and we'll be zercha to the Olam Haba with all of its good things.
Amen.